Welcome to the Truth About Ag. So, welcome to the Truth About Ag podcast, a real ag media broadcast, as well as powered by the Hebert Group of Companies. So, I am your host, Evan Schout, as well as my co-host here, Kristjan Hebert, and we've got infamy on today. Mr. Darrel Monette from Monette Farms has agreed to join us in, I'd like to say, the first podcast. So I think we finally have an exclusive, which I'm loving. So we are going to take you down a journey. We're gonna see the truth and the true story behind Monette Farms, which I'm looking forward to because I don't know it all. But before we do that, I just wanted to advertise quick, little Maverick Ag plug, stacking the deck in your favor when it comes to financial management. Maverick 2.0 comes out this November. Look for us on maverickag.com. So, all the administratives out of the way. Hebes, you want to start with the first question? I'm going to let you load this one up.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for coming on, Darrel. And I'm not going to hide anything. Darrel and I have turned into pretty good friends, and I'll admit when I think I have a crazy idea and everybody around me is calling me crazy, I usually phone Darrel just to remind me that I'm not as crazy as maybe the people around me think. And so that part I got to give thanks to you, and I think that's probably why we talk every now and then. But the journey I'd like the podcast to go down is, I know some of your backstory and how you started, and if I remember correctly, you're about an 81 model, a year older than me, and so instead of saying where you are, because everybody likes to speculate that, I'd rather you start with where you came from, right? Like when you moved back to the farm, how many quarters you were doing some sales work that taught you probably some lessons about business, and we'll go from there.
No, it sounds good. Well, thanks for having me on, guys. Yeah, this is my first podcast. Kind of put my nose down and get shit done is kind of my motto and my team's motto. So, yeah, realistically, where I started, Christian, and I think you know this too. I remember food getting delivered to me as a kid, right? Kind of thing. We started, my parents, 8 quarters. We were still 50-50. So, we were only cropping 4 quarters of land, right? So I remember before I could go to a hockey camp, I had to summer follow around the clock, right, to get the stuff done so I could go. So that's where it all started. And I always said, anybody could have done what I did. Started off. My mom was a teacher and always wanted me to go to school, but at the end of the day, at 16, I was that weird kid that always knew I wanted to be in agriculture. And, I remember at 16, I had this whole plan. I was going to be a school bus driver and raise pigs and cows and chickens and do the whole 9 yards to buy my neighbor's farm. And my grandpa basically said, he could have backed me. My grandpa did have, I think 20 quarters at the time and could have helped, but he said, no, you got to go to school. And so I lost my first land deal. Actually, yeah, I don't say this. Patrick Marlowe and his family actually came in. He just signed the big contract, and we walked into this land auction. And I said, "Well, what the heck am I doing here, little farm boy, 16? I'll never compete." And so, yeah, needless to say, the neighbors ended up buying it. I went to school. I took ag economics and drove home every weekend. Work hard, party hard is our big motto too. And so after all the egg partying, I'd come home on weekends and sit in the tractor and rented my first quarter of land and bought my first quarter in 2004. So I always joke that first quarter, I think I paid $40,000 for it. We all know that it's 10x there. So yeah, continued down, took my ag economics, and then went and took some chemical rep jobs over when I was in university. So got to know Western Canada, selling some Railroad Flow and stuff like that. But that was when the chemical companies, your job was to entertain and golf and meet farmers. So got to meet a lot of guys across Western Canada. And then after that, started selling equipment. Had no idea how a motor ran, which is crazy as that sounds, but I could know the efficiencies of farming, we'll call it that way. And I remember I was a young guy, super excited to sell this equipment, and I was going to tell everybody how, this many acres is this many equipment you need. And the first farm I went to was a 2,000-acre farmer and bought a whole brand new fleet of Case IH equipment. And I was like, how does that make economic sense? So I knew there was ironitis out there in the farming world. But so I sold equipment for 8 to 10 years at Redhead Equipment. Learned a lot. Had a good manager, Al Carey, that actually still friends to today, and gave me a lot of what I learned today about working hard to get the job done. So, and then basically farmed on the side, took everything I made and put it back into farming. And at the time, couldn't afford land, so rented land, rented a lot of land from local area, and stayed around the Swift Current area. And then from there, started expanding outside of there and quit selling equipment in 2013. And I had 25,000 acres at that time. And I was working out of my mom's table. Everybody would meet there. And, there was just too many people. And I was, at the time, pushing #1 salesman at Redhead. So I had to pick one or the other. So, and ended up farming. So, and then from there, the rest is history on the growth front. So,
Yeah, you can. You've never been scared of growth. You go back to that first quarter, though. I mean, let's be honest. There's lots of speculation about how you buy land and debt and all that stuff. And I'll guarantee you, the most levered you ever were was buying the first quarter for 40 grand.
yeah, it's like going to university and you think you're stressed about money, and all you have to do is get $200 to go to the bar at night or whatever, right? And with farming, it was I remember in 2006 that was 2 years after I bought that first quarter. How am I going to pay for anything, right? I mean, yields were down, cost of machinery, everything, costs were always up. One of the guys I looked to when I was selling equipment, I was fortunate to be able to sell equipment over those years, because the generation above us, you're right, I'm an 81 model. The generation above us, they're the baby boomers. A lot of them in agriculture were forced to farm, right? They were the oldest son or whatever. So we had the unique ability to be able to learn from people that could have been dentists, lawyers, accountants, entrepreneurs, everything. And two things they always said: build your shop bigger than you've ever built, because you'll grow into it. And #1 was spend more time with your kids when they're younger. And so those are two things. You asked about mentorship, but those are two lessons that I learned selling equipment, is that you have to look at the horizon, right? You'll always find a way to the horizon, unless if you're looking at your feet, you'll always stumble. So if you look at the horizon, you'll find a road there. And so, back to your question about leveraging, I mean, that's how it's been done, right? I bought a quarter. Timing is everything. You can have luck, you can have good people, but timing is great. There's people that I've bought out over the years that went through the 90s, the early 2000s. I said, even until 2008, it was tough farming. I don't care who you were, what kind of education you had, what kind of wealth you had. It was cutthroat. And I think we're probably getting back into that. But you look at the past 2 decades, and we've just had a great run, right? And where appreciation of land, low interest rates, all of that has enabled my personal wealth, our farm's personal wealth, to continue to grow. And that was on levering. So I guess that's economics 101 for me.
Well, I think the interesting part is, and probably one of the first conversations we had, and we talk about it with farmers all the time, but I never actually maybe met another farmer to have super deep discussions about it, was really understanding that there's two businesses. There's real estate and there's farm operations, which you and I talk all the time, that in a perfect world, let's not even call it farm operations. Let's talk that it's a food production company, right? Because consumers understand food no different than the ag minister should be the food minister. And I mean, you go back, companies throughout history. I mean, McDonald's makes what? The majority of their wealth is built up in land, and something like 30% of their operational profit is based on land, and nobody knows about it, right? Like, it's been part of businesses forever to have those two things separated. And it was something, literally, I remember the first 2 times talking to you, that you had a real clear vision on kind of the real estate side and the food production side. So maybe talk through a little bit of where that came from.
Yeah, it's probably one of the farmers I met when I was selling, and he said, "You'll never be able to pencil out buying land. It's always too expensive." And he was elderly, but I took it to heart, and it's been true. The first quarter I bought at 40,000, I remember penciling it out. It didn't make sense. Does 400,000, does 600,000? It doesn't make sense. But you look at been doing some research, which is interesting. If you would have invested $1 in 1991 into farmland in Canada or the US, taking the average, you'd be up 2,300% today. If you did the same in the S&P 500, you're up 1,100. If you do it in gold, you're up 500%. So I know that's a time frame in history, but still, that really shows that it's a land play. And I also had some young scouts over from Europe one time that were over here scouting for people or to, buy land. And I met them and drove them around, and that's a whole nother story. But it was interesting because their mentor back home was like, it's the European model. I've toured over to Europe. There was two separate models there. You could never afford land in Europe and farm it, right? And anything that happens in what I call the New World, North America, started over in Europe, and we just are 100 or 200 years behind. I brought my kids to Japan this last March break just to see the culture and the growth and the years of, food production. And they are, talk about quality of food production. They're probably number one. Well, that's where all our wheat went, right? Kind of thing through the wheat board days. And so back to the land and the food production are two separate things, but are going to be the oldest industry in the world, and it's going to continue to be there. So the land is an investment that isn't going anywhere. You can touch it, feel it. There's more people that are reaching out, more of my landlords that want to see it as generational wealth. It's a tax implication too, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
You look at all the wealthy families in the world, they all have land, right? Of some sort, commercial, farmland, they have land. So that's what drove my vision, I guess, over the last. It's not a sexy one. Oil and gas was making more money than me by far. A lot of friends, right? But looking back, now I've went through that. Now it might be another 10 or 20 years of where farming isn't sexy, but long term, it's going to be there for us. And food production, I mean, that's our goal of an organization. We've changed it from everybody asks, oh, how much land do you want to farm? For me, it's not about land anymore. It's doing more with less. Sorry, it's still about land. That's always an interesting, investment. But our goal is to feed 1 billion people. Divided by 4 pounds a day is what the average is. And so we're equating that back. How can we do the efficiency of growing more? We're more into irrigated land, more where water naturally falls, more row cropping, vertical integration, all of that to make it work and diversify. So
Yeah.
So I got a quick question on that. Just, I mean, you watch the rest of the industry, and I mean, obviously, there's a lot of farms doing different than what you're doing, Darrel. So how did you and your team, I mean, keep that vision of, we know it's not penciling, but we also have this, we have this economics background, and we know where the end result is going to go. How did you get your team to buy in, and how did you keep the train towards that ultimate goal in the end?
well, I guess you look at different. It was private industry. It was me. I'm a driver. We'll put it that way. And this is what we're doing. But people are so important. I mean, it's always been important. Communication is key, right? I mean, I remember this is a funny story. My first employee was an individual, and him and my dad definitely had different visions, right? And I was in the back of the combine hopper cleaning it out, and I come out and they both had each other's collars and arms cocked at each other, right? Kind of thing. And I'm like, whoa, what is this all about? And so that was the start of, communicating, right? People have different views, and at the end of the day, you just need to communicate. So, like you say, every year we do a review. Even though you're with each other every day, you have to have a formal review process. And we've even pushed that to every quarter. Even our senior management, this week we're having EOS training of communication. So, and that's where that started 3 years ago, about feeding a billion. But before that, Evan, it was just, this is what we're doing. It's, we're still feeding the world. We're working together as a team. We're culture. We're young, vibrant, efficiency, get work done, work hard, play hard, like I said earlier. And it's been great to align the team, right? I always said, people ask, why are you still doing this? And I'm having fun doing it. The day I stop having fun, then I'll maybe throw in the towel. But I also tell my kids they can use a lot of words at home, but they can't use the R word, and that's retirement. Because I always, when I buy land from people, I ask, what is your next step? Because 95% of land transactions are emotional. And if they don't have something they want to do after, I'm not going to force them to sell their land. They have to have a plan in place, and I think that's been key to success. We have a lot of good relationships with the people that we either bought or rented their land from.
Well, I think that's a pretty good story, and that, let's be honest, we get lots of questions on how do we build a farm so that it can run itself. How do businesses have processes implemented? And don't get me wrong, processes and communication and people are the critical foundational blocks of a business. But you pull away the leader that people are willing to follow, and I don't care what you have for a business, it's not going to be successful, right? Like, the part of the reason, and don't get me wrong, we'll go into the communication after, but part of the reason you have a HR plan and that you can get people to buy into the dream is because, like you said, you're still having fun every morning you get up, you're excited. And that's infectious to a team, right? People follow the fun and the leader and the goal, because there's an actual goal. There's too many companies in this world today that are they're just coasting, right? There is no goal. So that, I think that, you lead, right? We call that, whatever you want to call it within EOS, the visionary, the driver. You and I always talk about the dreamer, right? You got to dream bigger than what you think is possible, because otherwise you got nothing to chase. Don't just make it all systematic. That's where the land comes from. But let's be honest, every person on earth buys land. It's called their house. Buying a house doesn't pencil out for most people. It's over 25 years. The interest makes it worth twice as much as it is. What it is it forces you to go to work every day, and it forces you to save money. Thing is, farmers just buy houses all the time. It's called land, right? And they don't land doesn't, in theory, break down like a house will. You don't have to replace the hot water heater. It should just appreciate, other than the market. But let's go back into your communication. So I think one thing we hear all the time from farms is we can never find enough people. We can never find good people. So you talked that you guys implemented EOS already, but maybe walk through some successes you think on the communication side, process side, and maybe some theory on full-time and part-time staff.
Yeah, I think you have to get systems in place. As much as a visionary you talk, I'm 30,000 feet and everybody calls me the tornado. I come to all my farms and have all this, what I want to get done. And my brother is my ops guy, and we have some brotherly love discussions, we'll call it, right? About systems and procedures that need to be followed and kept in place. And that's key to us. We have a developing leaders program within. We've been super successful. We hire from about 13 countries, but we actually have way more local people now than we do foreign workers. And it's because we're making this a career for people. It's not just a job. And, we want to see one of our director of US operations, Mike Murphy, too. He's been great to our team. He started as a laborer. Me and him, we joke around how we were under a drill 7 years ago and how things have changed, right? And so he's a mentor also for a lot of our other, what I should say, our developing leaders program, that we build our own bullpen, it's called, right? Where then these people have the opportunity to go lead their farm. Our average farm is 20 to 30,000 acres as a pod. And, we've had some army training, it's called, right? Where you basically, what is the best number of crew? And it's 6 to 12 people. And so these people then get to run their own farm. When I go to their farm, I say, hey, how are you doing on your farm? they embrace that is their farm and their communication within their team, right? So, and we just give them the skill set. We have in-house agronomy, purchasing, all of that stuff to help them have the skill set to run their farm. So, that's been key, is building our own culture within. Another one I want to say is, I'm not on social media. Heck, we all know I'm not a tech guy. I mean, we couldn't even basically get on this podcast together, but um, we hired a great social media, and we did our first YouTube video back in 2016. It was actually one of my first farm managers that I hired from South Africa, and he surprised me and put together this amazing video, over a million hits now on it. And I've taken that, we're worldwide. We feed the world. We ship around the world all of our products, from pulses to oil seeds to produce now. And you know what? People want to see their food production, and our social media team has done a great job of making it look like we're having fun. Trust me, there's always challenges every day in the
Yep.
fires. I always say we're always close to being a firefighter, putting out a fire, but we're having fun doing it, and that's key.
It's funny. I always say that the dreamer's real job description is chief firefighter. You just don't know. In our left hand, we carry an extinguisher. In our right hand, we carry a gas can. So the team never knows which one you're coming up to fix, right? It's really good or really bad. But,
Yeah.
and I mean, you're 20 to 30K acres. It's funny because we always say, what, 2,500 acres per full-time employee. So the math almost works out perfect. And I'm assuming you see, brown soil zone, it's probably more to 3 to 3,500 acres an employee, and black would be a little bit less just from workload. But I think the part that I found interesting in all that was the systems and then their farm, right? So I mean, in a way, you've kind of created, Monette's own franchise model. Like, you look at Subway, they own the land under the restaurant, and they own the restaurant in a lot of cases, and the franchisees get the processes and have access to the expertise, but at the same time have a fair bit of autonomy on day-to-day decision making. It's all different, but really you've kind of just taken a bit of a franchise model and implemented it into your farm.
Yeah, I mean, that was not the game plan, right? Kind of thing, but it just naturally, the organic growth, we don't have much organic farming, but we've done a lot of organic growth. We'll put it that way, right? Kind of thing. And it has, because it goes back to your people, right? They have to buy in. They have to, I mean, the hours worked here, anybody we hire and they're worried about weekends off and all of that, that's not the farming industry, right? It's a passion. I'm at my office right now. It's your thing of how you were brought up. Like, I've always had, we grew up in this little 900 square foot house, but there was this big picture window that we could always see the sunrise and sunset. And living out in the country now a bit more, I mean, you can't put a dollar amount on that, right? Kind of thing. And so from our perspective, you got to buy into the culture, right? Kind of thing. And that's been key.
So, talking about your kids, you said the one piece of advice from the farm was spend lots of time with your kids when they're young. I mean, I know you good enough, and last time we were together was out in Kelowna with all the boys playing hockey, so I know that part of it. I think the question I have for you is, even at our size, which is a small garden to you, you'd get it seeded in a day almost. But what do you do, or what's your plan to make sure you still integrate the kids into farming, right? Like, you would have been no different than me. I mean, I was running Deere 4320s and 4440s when I could hardly touch the clutch. I remember taking out my first fence post because I didn't push the brake to turn. And so that's the one thing. Bentley, my boy's 12, my daughter's 10. So just trying to find those ways to integrate them into the teams. And some of it's actually pretty awesome having team members train them. And I think the kids are less stressed and they can learn more. And some of it's harder because you're trying to integrate it into a team. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say this after Thanksgiving here and the whole family together. I'm actually currently living here just north of Calgary by Airdrie on a farm. And I think that's been key. The kids, they're in hockey academies and schools and that, and schoolwork's so important. But just, I mean, after Thanksgiving supper, we were pulling out fence posts, just doing some physical labor. They're so into technology now and stuff. They just need some fresh air and get part of it. I always said, I will never force any of my kids to become a farmer. They gotta love to do what they want to do. I'm also said they got to go get their undergrad degree minimum. And then they need to go work for somebody for 5 years. Yes, our organization will be larger and stuff like that, that they can work for our seed division or cattle division and never see me. But I want them to see some good, bad, the ugly from other employees. I mean, that's what I took from Redhead, right? I got to work for other bosses other than my dad. And I saw that selling. There was two types: people that left, worked whatever job it was, and came back to the farm, had a different mindset than always working under their dad. Some of them had actually even went to work for another farmer. You can stay in your industry, but you need to have that learning experience out there. So, from my kids' perspective, I give them all the opportunities they want. I have one that has probably been to every one of my farms and wants to continue being my sidekick. The other one, a little different, right? But as they grow up and go through different stages in life, now he's showing more interest, right? And my daughter, I always say there's the legal side of things, or account, like the organization is evolving so much that there's going to be opportunity. But if they don't want to be part of it, I'm not going to force them either. There's a lot of we have one employee, best one of our highly proficient operators, never came from a farm, had no concept of it, played farming simulator, right? And he knew, as an equipment operator and a salesman, I thought I pride myself in knowing equipment. He knew way more than me at 19 years old. He's been across 4 of my farms in every state and province, and is just very successful, right? And there's a city kid that basically learned a farming game. So we're on Farming Simulator because of it. And I think that's a pretty neat thing, that my kids in Calgary can talk to their friends and be like, hey, we're on Farming Simulator. We can go buy Monette Farms corn on the cob at Superstore now, or pumpkin or whatever. So just branding is becoming more kind of our focus now going forward, to get people communicating to come work for us. So.
Well, and I love the fact that we're sitting here talking to two extremely large farms, and we're talking about family still. Like, the industry likes to paint it as you get to a certain size and the family farm falls off and it's just a corporate structure. And we just spent the last 5 minutes talking about kids, and obviously you work with Russ, and your dad is probably still involved, Darrel. Like, how did you keep the family dynamic as you grew? Because honestly, if I'd have told my dad I was going to be the size you were when I started, he'd have looked at me like I was nuts. And I'm pretty sure Louis looks at Kristjan like that some days. So how'd you tell the story for the family to come along for the journey, I guess?
Oh, my dad, I won't maybe say the words he said exactly, but he still says I'm crazy, right? So, but now he's just along for the ride. I think my dad was pretty high revved individual, but he was out pulling fence posts with my sons last night, and stuff like that. So, the family dynamic, it's always a challenge. It's a challenge whoever you are, right? Kind of thing, to the mix of farm and work. My HR manager puts it right. It's always, there's this balance, but sometimes work is more important and needs to be done. You got to make hay when the sun shines, and you got to work. There's other times where it's family is more important than work, right? But it's not equal, it's fair, right? Kind of thing. And from that perspective, I think that's been, hey, we went through our ups and downs too. I'm no longer married, right? Kind of thing. And so, but in saying that, I'm always a glass half full. What did that enable me to do? And it enabled me to travel more. My brother is more situated in Swift Current, where our head office is. And family's important. I mean, all of our ranches out in BC, these are husband-wife organizations that their farms, their kids are there, they work on the farm, they have 4-H animals, they work as a team, and I think that's so important. And so you're right, Evan. Family that's what I want to do. Even within our core 20 to 30,000 acre, those managers need to know if that person is, has a sickness, going through a divorce, having troubles at home. They need to have that person to lean on. And so that's been important through our organization.
I think too, and Darrel, we've talked about this, is that pretty much all farms, the majority of the time in a perfect world would like to keep it going forever. Right now, they don't want to force their kids to do it. They don't want to, and sometimes because of both our sizes, people think we're crazy. But at the same time, I mean, you said it right with your kids. Like, one might run the seed plant, one might want your job in 20 years, one might be your head of law. So to be honest, I think part of the reason we both grew, and I mean, I said this before the podcast, it was one of the main reasons we grew, is I didn't want to have to be forced into selling it because it couldn't be run. So a farm that's small, where you do everything, you know, and you hire a couple part-time staff, that's really hard to keep going. If something happens to you, you get cancer, you die, or you fall off a cliff. Where at the sizes we are now, your teams, so would the growth maybe be there? No, might not be for a while until they get it figured out how to grow their way. But there's a role for everybody, and the business could run, and the kids could be within it, and they don't have to have, if they don't like the stress of the CEO, they don't have to have that job. We could have an external CEO, right? So I mean, in a way, I think it's set up, it could be easier for the kids than just being the jack of all trades, and they get to do more of what they like. But then secondly, I mean, I don't know about you. I'm as busy as I've ever been, but I also have more control of my calendar than I've ever had. So it's really up to me in seeding or harvest at 6 a.m. If I decide that going to hockey tryouts that evening is more important than helping out in the field, I go to hockey tryouts. And when we were 5,000 acres, that was not an option. I was in the combine or I was in the truck, and if I left, half the farm stopped, right? And so, like I said, I probably work as much or more than I ever have, and I'm assuming you're the same. But the control of your calendar now is completely in your own hands. And if you decide that family's more important that day, like you said, fair isn't always equal, but it is your decision, and you probably have enough people around you to go what you feel you need to go to.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you want to talk about the timeline, and that's where I see agriculture. There's going to be two segregations of it, right? Where you can have that, you know, you can just shut the combine or air drill down and go to your family event because you're not, you know, making every minute count, right? It's kind of a lifestyle more. So that will always be there. There will always be the small family farm. But then it's the growth, like you say, Kristjan, where you do have a team of 12 or whatever people, so that the toughest team is 3 to 4 people, right? If one person doesn't show up, holy crap, you're screwed for that day, right? And I see that, you know, on the farm we're on right now, it's a smaller farm in our view. And if one person doesn't show up, we're scrambling. Whereas if when you have 12 people or that kind of the dozen, I guess it goes back to Christianity, 12 at the Last Supper, right? Kind of thing. One can leave and you still get the job done. And that person doesn't feel like he's the stress coming back to work next day, being like, I caused all these other people stress. So I agree. I think that middle level is the toughest for any farm out there where you have that middle-sized team, right? So
Yeah. I think, Evan, I don't know how long you want us to keep going for. We could go for a while, but what was that?
I would go a couple hours. I'm just sitting here
Okay.
relaxed. So
Well, we'll go ahead, Darrel.
no, I just said, remember how you control that calendar? Now with this
Yeah.
whole digital, it's like, hey, I've got this hour and I gotta like go to the next thing because when
Yeah.
you're running a multi-teams calls, you got to keep rolling. But no, we got some time here. So
okay.
Well, how about we go? I always like the hindsight question a little bit, and I mean, obviously, you've done a lot of things right. I mean, I talk about making farming into blackjack all the time, and I don't know somebody that doubled down on aces more. Just your aces were lentils and chickpeas and buying land in Swift Current for a good decade before anybody else thought it was normal, right? But looking back, what are some things you try and do different?
you know, I don't know. That's a good question, right? Kind of thing. I look where I'm at right now, and I'm like, God, I don't know if I could have pushed the envelope anymore. But you know, there is pauses, and we're probably in one of those right now where you grow at a rapid pace, and you bring up the comment, I'm the grower, right? The visionary, let's go, let's go. But I think teams really need to look with it. There's two types of growth external and internal. So looking back, just making sure that all your internal growth mechanisms are in place before you grow externally. And I'm not saying I would have slowed down because you got to make hay when the sun shines, right? If I wouldn't have done that in the time period I did, I wouldn't be able to do it now. Because you look forward right now where our margins are, costs are at record highs. You can't do that, right? Kind of thing. And so from my perspective now, I look at it diversity into possibly some different crops, but the heydays will come back. We always did, you know, the 70s were there, and then we waited 20, 30 years, and then the late 2000s came and we've had those glory years. And now it's just we're here to farm, and we'll do it.
No, for sure. I think Evan, we should just dispel some rumors. I told Darrel we might do this, and we'll see what he feels like talking about or not. But whether it's the Western producer or the local coffee shop, it's almost some of my favorite things about farming, just to remind me why I enjoy what I do. I'll tell a story about a 93-year-old landlord that I have. We bought his land here just recently, rented to him from him for 15 plus years, and he's probably in my 10 best friends, actually. He drives to see me every Wednesday basically for coffee, and he's always got a good story. And his advice to me 3 or 4 years ago was, you want to know what, Kristjan? The day I come for coffee and I don't have a good story about you, I'm going to give you shit for not trying hard enough. Right? So that we almost use the stories as kind of ammunition, and we don't have time for TV, right? So it's our free stuff. So I told you this one before the podcast, was that the first rumor I'll dispel is Darrel is not buying me out. Last time I checked, and I'm not under an NDA, so I can say that. Right, but that's the newest one in Mooseman.
I haven't run those numbers if he is, so it would be surprise to me.
Come on, Evan. You know that we do deals. We don't always run the numbers, right? So
yeah,
no, the numbers don't work. We said, Evan. We just
napkin math. Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any good ones you feel like dispelling, Darrel.
You know, honestly, the rumorville is the rumorville, and exactly what you said. One old guy told me, he said, Darrel, don't stop doing what you're doing, because he says, I don't know what the coffee shop will talk about. So, you know, yeah, you hear about the rumors that somebody, you know, China owns me or some big investor owns me. And it goes back to how we started this podcast. Honestly, 100% leverage. And it is banks. And it's where our syndicate of banks is all Canadian banks. And I laugh when people say, "Oh, we'll use the Chinese own you or some foreign." I'm like, look at the stock market. Who owns Bank of Montreal? Who owns Scotiabank? Who owns? Guess what? I'm pretty sure there's some Chinese investors, just like anybody else, of Farm Credit or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, that's a rumor I always have, but it doesn't bother me anymore. Honestly, rumors don't bother me. We put our nose down as a team and we continue moving forward, right? And you know, you brought up one name before that, you know, kicked me out of his combine, and then he was the first one to, you know, phone me up when he was selling his land. So, you know, from my perspective, you know, everybody goes through emotions up and down. Like I said earlier, 95% of land sales is emotion. And that's why, you know, we have restricted areas in Saskatchewan and Manitoba where you have to be a Canadian resident. I don't see that changing, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Kind of thing. Other areas where they don't, at the end of the day, I'm sitting in Alberta right now. I can tell you this farm that I bought, it wasn't any foreign people that I was up against. It was other local farmers. Farmers love buying dirt, and that is our number one competitor, which is a good thing, right? And yeah, there'll be some big investors, Bill Gates and all of this, but it's such, they did an article on me in Montana, and I think I was like 0.0001% of the total land, but yet the article thought I was buying up all of Montana. There is 80 million acres, right, in Western Canada that can be farmed. There's a lot for everybody to go around if you want to be part of it. So,
well, I agree with you. It doesn't. Everyone. Well, first of all, it was just investors, right? Investors are the only ones running up land price. Now, let's be honest, you've done something no other farm's done, so they like to bring your name into it. But it's like, all I've ever seen is investors have put a bottom on it. They're making sure nothing's going to get stole. And if they can get somewhere between 2% in the old days and now closer to 5% return on their original investment, they liked it. It was like a T-bill for them, and they got the appreciation. Farmers were always, you pull ISC data on every RM, and it's always farmers paying top dollar, right? And in most cases, if they don't like the land selling, it's because they're just mad at themselves that they didn't take the risk to buy it. And I hate to say it, but it's true.
Yeah, and I'll make that comment. You brought it back where, you know, there was an OPCO and LandCo, and that's why farmers are the number one bidders on farmland, because investors can just make the money on the land, whereas a farmer can make it on operations and land. So that's why they're your competitor. people, yes, there's investors that keep a floor. And I think across any industry I go in, you need a floor price. It's a risk mitigator, right? So you look at Saskatchewan and Manitoba, there is no floor, right? Like the floor could literally fall out because we're not risk mitigating, whereas everywhere else there's risk mitigation, right? And honestly, that's what has been success, I think, for our organization too. You got to mitigate the risk. Why did we geographically diversify? Because Mother Nature we can't control, and that is the weather. And so that, and why did I go into the States? Currency risk, right? Different policies, different government. So we're a risk mitigator as much as we are a logistics company. And I think that, boat land ownership, everybody should just think about that. If you have no floor and we get into tough times, that's all I'm going to say is just think about that.
I want
I
to, I
remember
want to,
you and I
I want,
having.
I want to
Go ahead.
timestamp. I want to timestamp that when Kristjan
Yeah.
brought this up, because that is my first negative comments of this podcast are coming from that timestamp.
Oh
Because
yeah.
he literally he spoke at a conference a couple years back, and I'm sitting in the back with another large farmer, and somebody asked him the exact question we just talked about of what do you think about consolidation and all these big farms, and he looks out at the crowd and he goes, "Are you mad at the guy, or are you mad that you just didn't have the balls to do it?" And the guy beside me starts laughing. I just start shaking my head because I know where it's coming now.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, I think your risk mitigator thing's pretty interesting, right? So, I mean, done a lot of work in the insurance world myself, and I mean, if you go to kind of the standard deviation of gross margin, so how much it moves up and down on a 10-year cycle, the brown soil zone has more home runs than the black does, but it also has way more valleys, right? The black soil zone, it's pretty crazy unless you get far north, other than the frost. Like it's pretty steady, right? And so it was interesting, to watch you move. I don't know what your split would be, brown soil zone to black soil zone acres in today's world, but back in the Swift Current days, it was 100-0, right? And
Yeah.
then secondly, one mentor I talk about all the time is Danny Kleinfelter, and he always used to say, if you take insurance out of it, the two best ways you could risk mitigate. Number one, try to expand north to south because storms move west to east. And secondly, get into at least two countries because policy and currency are actually your biggest risk that no farmer ever thinks about.
100%. 100%. That we could elaborate on that and get into politics and everything else in between, but
Yeah.
that's the core of it all. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know, Darrel, you're probably booked for your next one in 2 minutes, so I'll wrap it up with one thing: is that I purposely brought up the rumors because one of the reasons I really like Darrel is he doesn't give a shit about the rumors, right? You're focused on your own goals and your own team, and I always say, to my own team here, all the time everybody else around us is wasting talking about the rumors is the time we use to get stuff done, right? And another good friend, I think Simmons was on one of the first podcasts, right? I thought one of his best lines he ever said is, I actually don't necessarily care if people like me. I just want them to respect me. That there's a big difference there, right? And I think the way our industry has consolidated, so you look at our equipment suppliers, you look at our fertilizer suppliers, our chemical suppliers, it actually gives me a fair bit of happiness that you can cause them some pain. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. Is that the wheat board kept a whole bunch of farms small forever, and there was no way to kind of really get any pressure on a lot of our suppliers. And right now, I think I'll use the word maverick. You're the maverick that's helping beat down some of those walls that I'm excited for the changes we're going to see in the next 10 years in agriculture. I really am.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I think agriculture is a very vibrant industry right now, and consolidation. I mean, on the primary production, you look at everybody above us, they've consolidated. And yes, of course they will, but the primary area has a lot to consolidate, but your jobs aren't going anywhere. We're between the bleeding and cutting edge right now because there's going to be some blood because when you come into consolidation, there's new technologies, people have to figure out their roles, but we're going to get somewhere where, yes, we will be able to be part of that vertical integration and control our destiny a bit more. So it's exciting times ahead. There's always fires to put out, but in saying that, you get to light fires too every once in a while. So that's fun too. So
Well,
thanks, guys.
and I think we got to remember, just last comment is 60% of the industry is over the age of 55, heading towards 60. and only 10% is actually under the age of 40 right now. So we're dealing with consolidation. It's coming, whether we like it or not. It's just who wants to be on the leading edge. So again, thank you for coming on, Darrel, especially for the exclusive, because I know this is your first one and you don't usually, you're not very vocal, obviously. So I like this. But again, thank you. And we are Real Ag Media. So like, share, subscribe, and join us, because this is The Truth About Ag. Thanks for joining us. The Truth About Ag podcast is a proud member of the Hebert Group, which includes Hebert Grain Ventures, Maverick Ag, and Farmer Coach. We appreciate the support. Lastly, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you have questions for a future podcast, please leave in the comments below. Thanks for listening.